Today I will be talking a little bit about incorporating the outfield wall into defensive runs saved. So many of you are probably familiar, at least on some level, with defensive runs saved, or DRS, which is our company's defensive evaluation metric. Our traditional DRS metric dates back to 2003 and is what you can see on Fangraphs or Baseball Reference, so it's publicly available. Its main component is the range and positioning system, which was formerly known as the plus-minus system. And at its core, it rates fielders' abilities to convert batted balls into outs. We also have our StatCast DRS metric, which was introduced to our clients in 2017. Its main component is the PART system, which stands for positioning, air balls, range, and throwing. We gave a presentation on the PART system here at last year's SABR Analytics Conference, describing the differences between it and the range and positioning system, with the main difference being that with StatCast DRS, we are able to split range and positioning into separate components. At this time, StatCast DRS is only available to our team clients. One of the main principles of DRS is that it rewards or penalizes players based on a play's difficulty. So for example, if we have a play that we estimate to be made 90% of the time, and the fielder makes that play, then we take 1 minus 0.9, and he's credited with saving 0.1 plays. If that play is not made, then we take 0 minus 0.9, and he is essentially penalized for losing 0.9 plays. We then take some additional calculations to convert plays saved into runs saved, but this right here is essentially the backbone of the range and positioning system. So in that example, I used 90% as the expected out rate, but how is a number like that actually derived? Well, for variables in the outfield, we use the batted ball's distance, we use the batted ball's direction, and we do so at a very granular level, which we call the ball in play vector, and I'll talk a little bit more about vectors shortly. We consider the hang time of the batted ball, so how long was the ball in the air. Obviously, a lazy fly ball is easier to make a play on than a screaming line drive. And for StatCast DRS, we're also able to consider the fielder's positioning and how far he had to travel to the ball using StatCast's fielder positioning coordinates. But beyond those variables, we wondered if there might be anything else that could affect play difficulty in the outfield, and one such possibility would be the outfield wall. So plays in the outfield at the wall are inherently difficult because of the presence of a physical obstacle. This typically alters the approach that fielders have to take to get to the baseball. Ideally, they would be able to continue running at full speed or near full speed through the catch point, but they can't always do that when there's a wall in the way. And additionally, sometimes the wall forces them to leave their feet in these situations, which is another way that the play difficulty can increase, and their approach has to be altered. Now, some plays at the wall actually are impossible. The classic example would be a play at Fenway where a ball hits high off the green monster, like this one. Here you have Rhys Hoskins playing left field for the Phillies, and obviously there's no feasible way that he can make a play on this ball. So when our video scouts are charting games at BIS, they log whenever a ball hits off the wall and it is determined to be out of reach. Now this is dependent on where the ball hits off the wall in terms of its height, and whether or not the fielder, if he was standing at the base of the wall, would be able to make a play on it. So if you can imagine, if Hoskins was standing at the base of the wall here, obviously he wouldn't be able to reach it, and so it's marked as being out of reach. The important thing to note here is that out-of-reach wall balls are already excluded from defensive runs saved, so when we talk about difficult plays at the wall, these plays are already excluded. And even though Hoskins had a poor DRS in left field last season, he wouldn't have been penalized for this particular play. Now, if you could imagine a ball that hit further down on the wall, around the scoreboard, around the WB Mason sign, that would be in reach, and it would be fair game for our calculations. So what does a play like that look like? Here's a play where Denard Span is playing left field for Tampa Bay. I'll let it loop through a few times. Obviously, he can't keep running through the wall, and he has to leave his feet, so it does become a more challenging play than if the wall was not there. Obviously, he made the play, but not all outfielders have the same fortune. Maybe they mistime their jump, or they don't have as good of an understanding of where the wall is. But he did make this play, so let's take a look at how DRS evaluates it. So the chance of making a play here, considering the bad ball characteristics, was estimated at 94%. And again, given that he made the play, he would be credited with saving 0.06 plays, which does not seem super significant. And if he hadn't made the play, then he would have lost 0.94 plays, which does seem fairly significant. Fenway in left field is obviously a little bit of an extreme. It's obviously a difficult wall to play because of its size, but it's also not as far away as other left field walls. So if you have a ball like this that's hit maybe 320 feet to left field, it may actually be a 90% play in some parks around the league, but at Fenway it becomes more difficult because of the wall. So is this an extreme play in an extreme park, or is there more to it? If the expected out rates are being overestimated at the wall across the board in all parks, then a system like DRS would struggle in two ways. One, outfielders wouldn't be rewarded enough when they do make a difficult play, like we just saw with Denard Span. And two, they would be penalized too much when they don't make a difficult play. And again, if Span hadn't made the play there, he would have lost 0.94 plays, which seems significant. So we have a few questions about this problem. The first being, how much more difficult are plays near the outfield wall? And similarly, at what point do they actually become more difficult? So when we say near the wall, is that 10 feet from the wall, 5 feet from the wall, 3 feet from the wall, et cetera? Two, are our defensive run saved models properly estimating the out rates on these plays? And three, if they are not, can we improve the models by incorporating the wall as a variable? So to begin investigating the play difficulty near the wall, we need two things. We need the batted ball locations and we need the wall distances. Do we have that data? We have the batted ball locations thanks to our extensive video scouting operation at BIS, but we did not have the wall distance measurements, so that was something that we needed to collect. So how do we go about doing that? In our standard baseball charting operation at BIS, we divide the field into 91 vectors. To visualize this, you can consider the field as a right angle with 90 degrees. So going from 0 to 90 creates 91 unique vectors. So each of those vectors then represents a 1 degree wedge from foul line to foul line. And we went forth by calculating the distances at each of those 91 vectors. The 5 lines that you see on the screen there are simply 5 examples of vectors, one being at the right field line, one in right field, one at straightaway center, one in left, one down the left field line. But if you could imagine 91 of those spanning across the entire field, those are the vectors at which we measured the wall distances. So now we can begin comparing the batted ball distances to the wall distances based on the vector at which the ball was hit. In this particular example, you have a ball that hits right at the base of the wall, and at that vector, both the wall and the ball were measured at 387 feet. And now we can begin tackling some of our questions. The first one being, how much more difficult are plays at the wall? So this plot shows the 2018 air ball out rate by distance from the wall, going from 25 feet all the way to the wall at 0 feet. What we see here is a pretty consistent trend of converting batted balls into outs from 25 feet to 15 feet to 10 feet. Then there's a little bit of a drop off, and then there's a significant drop after that. Specifically, it appears that these balls, or these buckets of balls within 3 feet of the wall, is where these plays become increasingly difficult. So we know that within 3 feet of the wall is where these plays become difficult. And our next question is, how exactly does DRS and the system of creating expected out rates evaluate these plays? So we calculated the actual and expected team out rates here to account for the fact that multiple fielders can have a chance at making a play on the same ball, so these are the team level. And what you see is that balls that were hit right to the wall at 0 feet had an actual out rate of 13%. Balls that were measured a foot away from the wall were calculated at 24% actual out rate, and so on. You can also see the expected out rates here, and you can notice that they are significantly higher than the actual out rates. Beyond 3 feet from the wall, we saw numbers that were within reason that we would expect, and there's always going to be some deviations between actual and expected just based on how the system works. But obviously these balls within 3 feet of the wall are significant enough to warrant further research. So how do we improve? As I mentioned before, the existing variables for public DRS are the distance of the ball, the vector of the ball, and the hang time. So we were curious what the numbers that you saw on the previous slide would look like if we included a variable for whether or not the ball was hit within 3 feet of the wall and whether or not that would improve the model. So let's take a look at what the numbers would look like if we tested a model using the wall as a variable. Again, there's always going to be some discrepancies between the expected and the actual rates, but what we see here are some improvements in the new expected out rate column. Previously, in the current expected out rate column, you see expectations that are north of 40%, and now with the newer model, you see numbers that are a little bit more reasonable and appear to improve our ability to assess these expected out rates. We can also look at these plays in the aggregate. So this shows a grouping of balls that were close to the wall, 0 to 3 feet, as well as those plays that went from 4 to 25 feet. And the actual out rate on all of those close to wall plays was 22%. And the out rate on the 4 to 25 plays was 72%. But the big takeaway here is that the current DRS system currently estimates those close to wall plays at 45%. Compared to that just 22% actual rate. But then when we incorporate the wall as a variable, we see a 22% expected out rate, which nearly matches the actual rate. I say nearly given that there's some rounding, so it's not identically 22%, but at the rounded version, they are nearly identical. So let's revisit the Denard span play using the model that uses the wall as a variable. Now, the chance of a catch considering the bad ball characteristics plus the proximity of the wall would be 28%, and since he made the play, he would be credited with saving 0.72 plays, which is likely a better representation over the 0.06 plays that we were seeing being saved before. And again, if he hadn't made this play, then he previously would have lost 0.94 plays, but here he would only lose 0.28 plays. We saw similar results with our StatCast DRS model. Again, plays within 3 feet of the wall were being overestimated. And StatCast DRS uses a machine learning model to estimate the probability of a play being made. In addition to the variables I mentioned before, we also now consider a close to wall variable for those plays within 3 feet of the wall. And we saw significant improvements to the expected out rates there as well. So here's a look at the aggregated numbers for the StatCast system. Again, 0 to 3 feet, they were being overestimated. In this model, they were being overestimated at 39% compared to the 22 actual rate, but now we do better on both the close to wall and the other plays as well. So to give you a little taste of the StatCast DRS numbers, here's a look at some of the players who improved the most in part run saved after making the adjustment. 2 players of interest that are highlighted here, Jackie Bradley Jr. and Andrew Benintendi, obviously play their home games at Fenway Park, and as we expected, they saw a little bit of a boost after making this adjustment. Gregory Polanco with the Pirates is another example of a player who plays his home games in front of a large wall and gets a little bit of benefit here. And Mike Trout is another name who always stands out on leaderboards, and you see him on this list as well. Obviously, these aren't enormous changes, and at the end of the day, plays that are at the wall still represent a pretty small percentage of plays overall. But we do believe that this is an improvement to our system, and specifically an improvement to being able to assess the probability of making plays in the outfield. For our team clients, these numbers in StatCast DRS have been implemented and are ready to go. The model is ready to go for the 2019 season. And for the public, we are planning on incorporating this into public DRS for the start of the 2019 season, as well as eventually incorporating it into the numbers that you'll be able to see on Fangraphs and Baseball Reference. Before I wrap up, I would just like to acknowledge the BIS Video Scouts for all of their hard work in collecting all of the data points and allowing us to even do analysis like this. They were also very valuable in helping to collect the wall distance measurements for this particular project, so they deserve to be recognized. I'd also like to acknowledge John Dewan, who hopefully you got to hear speak earlier. He laid the groundwork for DRS years ago, but continues to encourage us to find ways to improve it and to push it forward. And I'd also like to acknowledge the rest of the R&D team at BIS, not only for their continued collaboration on this project, but for keeping us at the forefront of baseball analytics moving forward. And finally, I'd just like to thank SABR for hosting us this weekend and for allowing me to present. Thank you, and if you have any questions,
what in this system takes into account and tries to measure the amount of variation that the fielder will have to take from say a direct path to where the ball might contact the wall versus perhaps having to run parallel to the wall because it's fading away from it. Where in that system isn't that kind of thing measured?
So right now it doesn't currently account for any kind of route efficiency. Obviously there might be some type of wall configurations that don't even allow it. It doesn't currently incorporate any of that, but I could see that being an area of future research that we would be able to, specific wall dimensions that we might need to further assess.
That would also affect foul walls, I would think.
Yeah. So right now, the walls that we have are only the outfield walls, but if we continue to look into foul balls and things like that, that would be something that would come up as well.
Now, is the DRS only considering catch or no catch, or do you have any other metric that, for example, if you've got a ball hit high off the green monster, it's obviously uncatchable, but part of the fielder's skill is going to be, say, to hold the batter to as few total bases as possible.
Right. Yeah. So the main component, like I said, in public DRS is the range and positioning system. In StatCast, it's the part system. Those are just the systems that measure the out conversion. But then we also consider other things like we have our defensive misplays and good plays system, which would be something like that, where each misplay essentially has a run value associated with it. And in that scenario, if it's holding runner, not allowing them to advance or something like that, we also incorporate that in. We have run save values for arms, so if they prevent advancement, that would also get incorporated as well. So yeah, the main components are the ones that measure out conversion, but they also consider other variables like that too.
Any variable with respect to height on the wall? A ball caught at the ankles perhaps being more difficult than a ball caught at the chest?
Yeah, so right now we don't have any sort of height measurement of the wall. It's something that we've talked about. But yeah, as of now, we don't actually have the height, and that's kind of baked into what you see at the 0 feet away from the wall, right at the wall. It's a little bit more difficult. But as of now, we don't actually have the height, so that's not something that we can actually consider right now.
You mentioned the 2019 public version will be supplied to various sites that present DRS publicly. will there be any retroactive data supplied to them so that they'll be able to go back and adjust previous years' measurements?
Yeah, so that's something that we're still, working through, and obviously if we go all the way back to 2003, we'll have to dig up some old parks to be able to measure. But yeah, so for StatCast ERS, we've gone back through the StatCast years essentially to 2016. But yeah, that is something that eventually we believe we'll be able to roll out and incorporate into what you see. Yep. Okay, if there's any more questions, thank you for your time.